Fresh air is good for you, she used to repeat, even when it was -4 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Yesterday, I accidentally closed the window and woke up to someone scratching at the glass from outside. In the streetlight, I saw a face, an exact copy of mine. I never questioned why Grandma insisted on keeping my bedroom window open every single night. Growing up in her old Victorian house after my parents died in that car accident when I was 8, I just accepted her rules as part of my new reality. The house was always drafty anyway, with its creaking floors and rattling pipes, so what difference did one open window make? But living there wasn't easy. During winter nights, I'd pile every blanket I could find on my bed, sometimes wearing my coat to sleep just to stay warm. My friends at school thought it was weird when I'd mention it, but I'd just shrug and say my grandmother was old-fashioned. She had her reasons for everything, even if they didn't always make sense to me. The window faced the dense woods behind our house. Those trees stretched back for miles, thick and dark even during the day. Sometimes I'd lie awake listening to the sounds coming from out there, branches snapping, leaves rustling in ways that didn't match the wind patterns. Grandma always said it was just animals, deer or raccoons looking for food. She'd leave small plates of leftovers on the windowsill some nights, and they'd always be empty by morning. When I turned 18 and moved out for college, I finally got to experience what normal sleep felt like. A warm room, closed windows, no mysterious forest sounds keeping me awake. It felt like luxury. But whenever I'd visit Grandma during breaks, she'd insist I sleep in my old room with the window open, just like before. She'd get genuinely upset if I tried to close it, her hands shaking as she'd prop it back open. After Grandma passed away last month, I inherited the house. Moving back felt strange, like stepping into a time capsule of my childhood. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, her reading glasses still on the kitchen table, her favorite mug in the sink, my old bedroom unchanged with that same stubborn window. The first week back, I kept the window open out of habit and maybe respect for her memory. But as the nights got colder, I started closing it without thinking much about it. Nothing seemed different at first. I slept better than I had in years, finally warm and comfortable in my own childhood bed. But 3 nights ago, something changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound I couldn't quite identify. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across glass. At first, I thought it might be a tree branch scraping against the window in the wind. But when I sat up and looked toward the window, my blood went cold. There was a face pressed against the glass from outside. In the dim glow of the streetlight, I could make out features that looked impossibly familiar. The same nose, the same jawline, the same dark eyes I saw every morning in the mirror. But this face was gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with skin that looked pale and almost translucent. The eyes held an expression of desperate hunger that made my stomach drop. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then the face disappeared, and I heard footsteps, bare feet on wet grass, moving away from the house and toward the woods. I spent the rest of that night huddled in my bed with every light in the room on, telling myself it had been a dream or maybe just my reflection somehow distorted by the glass. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the windowsill. Small, delicate prints that matched my own shoe size exactly. And when I went to brush my teeth, I noticed something that made my hands shake. My toothbrush was damp, even though I hadn't used it yet. Update 1. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, so I decided to go through Grandma's things more carefully. She was a bit of a pack rat, keeping boxes of old papers, photographs, and documents in the basement. I'd been putting off sorting through everything, but now I felt like I needed answers. In a dusty corner behind her old sewing machine, I found a wooden chest I'd never noticed before. Inside were family photos going back generations, some so old they were daguerreotypes on metal plates. What struck me immediately was that in every single photo, there were 2 people who looked almost identical. Not just similar, identical twins, standing side by side in formal poses. My great-great-grandmother with her twin sister. My great-grandfather with his twin brother. Photo after photo, generation after generation, always twins. But I knew from family stories that all these people had been only children. Grandma herself had always told me she was an only child, and I certainly was too after my parents died. At the bottom of the chest, I found a leather-bound journal in Grandma's handwriting. The entries went back decades, and as I read them, I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. The first entry I could make out clearly was from 1952. The baby came today. Doctor says one was stillborn, but I know better. I saw it move, saw it breathe. But when I told them, they looked at me like I was crazy. They took the body away before I could stop them. But I know it's still out there. I can feel it. Further entries describe strange occurrences, food disappearing from the kitchen, small items going missing, sounds in the woods at night. And then, a few years later, I was right. It came to the window tonight. Thin and wild, but alive. So alive. It's been surviving somehow in the woods. I left it some bread and milk. It was gone by morning. Page after page detailed my grandmother's secret relationship with what she believed was her twin. How she'd leave food out regularly. How she'd keep her bedroom window open so he could visit when he needed to. How she'd learned that closing the window would anger him, make him desperate and potentially dangerous. The most chilling entry was from just a few months ago. She's coming back to the house soon. I need to prepare her, but how do you tell someone their whole life has been built on a lie? How do you explain that the reason she survived her birth was because I made a deal? One window, always open. One offering, every night. That's what keeps the balance. I sat in that basement for hours, reading and rereading those entries. According to Grandma's journal, our family had been having twin births for generations, but one twin was always declared stillborn and secretly survived in the woods. The families who figured out the truth learned to coexist with their lost children by leaving offerings and keeping windows open. Those who didn't, well, there were entries about entire families found dead, apparently from natural causes, but always with scratch marks around their windows. But the entry that made me drop the journal entirely was the last one, dated just a week before Grandma died. I found the old family albums in the attic. The photo is there, just like I remembered. She needs to see it when she's ready. She needs to understand what's coming. I practically ran up to the attic, something I'd always avoided as a kid because it scared me. But now I needed to find what Grandma was talking about. Behind stacks of Christmas decorations and old furniture, I found more photo albums, these ones even older than the ones in the basement. And there it was, in an album from the year I was born. A photo I'd never seen before, taken in what looked like the hospital. It showed me as a newborn baby, but I wasn't alone. Next to me was another baby, identical in every way except for how thin and pale it looked. At the bottom, in Grandma's careful handwriting, the day they'll finally meet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the album. According to the hospital records I'd seen before, I was born alone. My parents had never mentioned a twin, but here was proof that there had been two of us, and somehow one of us had survived outside the normal world. That night, I couldn't bring myself to close the window. Instead, I sat in a chair facing it, waiting. Around midnight, I heard the familiar scratching sound. This time, I forced myself to look directly at the window instead of hiding. The face appeared again, but this time it stayed longer. I could see more details, the way its hair hung limp and unwashed, how its clothes looked like they were made from scraps of fabric and leaves. But what struck me most was the expression. It wasn't threatening or angry. It looked lonely, desperate for connection. I realized this other version of me, had been surviving alone in the woods for my entire life. While I grew up in a warm house with Grandma's love and care, it had been living wild, sustained only by whatever scraps we left on the windowsill. Update 2. After that second encounter, I made a decision that probably sounds crazy, but I had to know more. I started leaving food on the windowsill again, just like Grandma had. Not just scraps, but actual meals, sandwiches, fruit, sometimes warm soup in a thermos. Every morning, everything would be gone. I also started staying awake to watch. Night after night, I'd sit by the window, and gradually, my twin started appearing more regularly. At first, it would just take the food and disappear immediately. But slowly, it began to linger, studying me through the glass the same way I was studying it. The resemblance was undeniable, but the differences were striking too. Where I was healthy and well-fed, it was gaunt and lean. My hair was styled and clean. Its hair was long and wild, almost reaching its shoulders. My skin was soft from years of indoor living. Its skin was weathered and marked with small scars, probably from years of surviving outdoors. But the eyes were identical. The same dark brown eyes I saw in the mirror every day, with the same slightly upturned shape I'd inherited from our mother. I started keeping a journal of my own, documenting each encounter. How it moved with an almost animal-like grace, completely silent on its feet. How it seemed to understand the rhythm of the neighborhood, never appearing when there were sounds of cars or people nearby. How it had clearly been watching the house for years, probably decades, learning our routines and habits. One night, about 2 weeks into this routine, something different happened. Instead of just taking the food and leaving, it stayed at the window and began tracing shapes on the glass with its finger. At first, I thought it was just random marks, but then I realized it was trying to communicate. It drew simple pictures, a house, trees, two stick figures. Then it pointed at itself and at me, over and over again. The message was clear. It knew we were connected. It knew we were the same. I got up slowly and approached the window. When I placed my hand flat against the glass, it did the same from its side, matching my palm exactly. The glass was cold, but I swear I could feel warmth radiating from its hand. We stayed like that for several minutes, just looking at each other, two versions of the same person separated by a thin barrier. Then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. It began to mouth words, and I realized I could understand what it was trying to say. "Help me," it kept repeating. "Please help me." That's when I knew I had to make a choice that would change everything. This wasn't just some wild creature living in the woods. This was my twin, my literal other half, who had been abandoned and left to survive alone while I lived a normal life. Whatever had happened at our birth, whatever arrangement Grandma had made, it wasn't fair to either of us. I went to the window latch and slowly opened it wider than just the crack I'd been maintaining. The cold night air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of pine trees and earth. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, very carefully, my twin climbed through the window and into my room. Standing face to face without the glass between us was surreal. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed what I might have become under different circumstances. It was shorter than me by a few inches, probably from years of poor nutrition, and its clothes were indeed made from a patchwork of different materials, some fabric, some leather, some things I couldn't identify. But what struck me most was how it smelled. Not bad, exactly, but wild. Like pine needles and rain and something else I couldn't place. It moved cautiously, touching things in my room with wonder, the soft bedding, the electric lamp, the carpet under its bare feet. I realized this might be the first time it had been inside a house in years, maybe ever. Without really thinking about it, I went to my dresser and pulled out some of my clothes, a warm sweater, soft pants, clean socks. When I offered them, it looked at me with such gratitude that I almost started crying. It took the clothes and held them against its face, feeling the softness of the fabric. I pointed toward my bathroom and turned on the light. When it saw the running water from the faucet, its eyes went wide. It had probably been drinking from streams and rain puddles its entire life. I showed it how the shower worked, how to use soap and shampoo, and left it alone to clean up. When it emerged 20 minutes later, the transformation was incredible. Clean and dressed in my clothes, it looked exactly like me. Not similar, exactly like me. Same height now that it was standing straight, same build, same facial features. The only real difference was that its hair was longer and its skin was more tanned from years of sun exposure. Looking at it was like looking into a mirror, but one that showed a version of me that had lived an entirely different life. Final update. What happened next sounds impossible, but I swear it's true. When my twin, I started thinking of it as that rather than it, was clean and dressed, something amazing occurred. It began to speak. Not well at first, and with a voice that sounded rusty from disuse, but actual words. It told me its story in broken sentences, mixed with gestures and drawings when words weren't enough. According to what I could piece together, it had memories of being born, of being separated from me, of being taken away. But instead of dying, it had somehow survived in the woods, cared for by something. It wasn't clear what, but it described creatures that brought it food in its earliest years, taught it to find shelter, showed it how to stay hidden from people. But as it grew older, these woodland guardians had gradually withdrawn, leaving it to survive more and more on its own. That's when it started coming to the house, drawn by some instinctive connection to me and to Grandma, who had been the only person to show it any kindness. Over the following weeks, I made a decision that I know sounds completely insane. I let it live with me. Not openly, I couldn't exactly explain to neighbors why I suddenly had an identical twin who'd been living wild in the woods for 30 years. But secretly, sharing my space, my food, my life. The adjustment was challenging for both of us. It had to learn things that most people take for granted. How to use modern appliances, how to sleep in a bed, how to interact with the world of technology and convenience I lived in. Sometimes it would get overwhelmed and disappear back into the woods for a few days, returning when it was ready to try again. But slowly, gradually, it began to adapt. And more surprisingly, I began to change too. Living with someone who saw the world so differently, who had survived through pure instinct and connection to nature, gave me a perspective I'd never had before. It taught me things too, how to move silently, how to read weather patterns, how to find food and medicine in the forest behind our house. The most remarkable thing was how we began to balance each other out. Where I was anxious and overthinking, it was calm and instinctive. Where it was sometimes too impulsive or aggressive, I could provide patience and planning. It was like we were two halves of the same person, finally learning to work together instead of existing separately. We developed our own communication system, mixing words with gestures and an almost telepathic understanding of each other's thoughts and feelings. Sometimes I'd wake up knowing it had been having a nightmare, or it would prepare food for me before I even realized I was hungry. About 3 months into this arrangement, I found another entry in Grandma's journal that I'd missed before. It was hidden between pages, written in faded ink. The old stories say that twins separated at birth will always find their way back to each other. But the stories also say that when they reunite, they become something more than human, something that bridges the world of civilization and the world of nature. I hope she's ready for what comes next. I'm not sure what Grandma meant by that, but I think I'm starting to understand. Living with my twin has changed me in ways I can't fully explain. I sleep better than I ever have, but I also dream more vivid dreams that seem to show me places in the forest I've never been. I've started noticing things I never paid attention to before, the patterns of bird calls, the way shadows fall differently at various times of day, the subtle changes in air pressure that predict weather. And my twin continues to change too, becoming more human while still maintaining that wild connection to the natural world. It's learning to read and write, picking up language at an incredible pace, as if the capacity was always there but just needed the right environment to flourish. Last week, I made a decision that would have terrified me a year ago. I legally changed my name to include both our identities, not quite two names, but something that encompasses both who I was and who we're becoming together. I also started the process of creating official documentation for my twin. It's complicated, but with DNA evidence and some creative storytelling about a long-lost sibling, it's possible. The strangest part is that I don't feel like I'm living with another person anymore. I feel like I'm finally living as a complete person. All my life, I'd felt like something was missing, like I was only half of what I was supposed to be. Now I understand why. The window in my old bedroom stays open every night now, not because we need it for food or visits, but because it represents the bridge between two worlds, the civilized one I grew up in and the wild one my twin survived in. We're learning to live in both, to be citizens of both realms. I don't know what the future holds for us, or how we'll navigate a world that doesn't understand our situation. But for the first time in my life, I feel whole. I feel like the person I was always meant to be, before circumstances separated us into two incomplete halves. Sometimes, late at night, we'll sit by that open window together, looking out at the woods that were home to one of us and prison to the other. The forest doesn't seem dark and threatening anymore. It seems like part of our story, part of who we are. And sometimes, just sometimes, we see other figures moving between the trees in the distance. Other twins, maybe, still living separately, still waiting for their chance to become whole again. Grandma was right about fresh air being good for you. But she never told me it was good for the soul too. The window stays open now, and it always will.